Welcome to Tea Time with Talent Acquisition, the podcast aimed at fostering knowledge and sharing stories within the vibrant talent acquisition community. There's no surefire way to accomplish anything in life, but with each conversation, we aim to delve into diverse topics and present fresh perspectives to empower you, our fellow colleague, on your journey to success. I'm your host, Eden, and for the next hour or so, I'll be joined by a dedicated psychologist driven by a deep passion for understanding human dynamics, particularly the intricacies that lead to enhancing organizations for their collective welfare. Starting her journey as a generalist, this current head of people has led path through various agile startups that has enriched her experience and her expertise across both the people and the talent acquisition function. So when you're ready, grab your favorite tea or coffee if you prefer, and join me in welcoming today's guest, head of people and talent acquisition at Oetker Digital, Clara. So very nice to have you.
Hi, Eden. Yes, thanks for having me.
Perfect. Really appreciate, obviously, like I said, you taking the time. So before we dive into the key topic of today, I always like to ask everyone the same question at the beginning, and that is, why do you work in the field that you're in?
Oh, that's a difficult question. It started with me, and I always wanted to study psychology. And then in psychology, I quickly realized that I don't want to go this clinical path, that many psychologists take. And I was really intrigued by the diagnostics part, by the organizational psychology. And then when I looked around, where can I actually use it? The first thing that came to my mind was talent acquisition. And I really wanted to be part of the selection processes. I really wanted to be part of interview processes. And that is what I was actively looking for. And that is how I somehow ended up in the people and talent function.
Nice. I say somehow, but it does sound quite intentional from that perspective.
Yeah. Looking back, it looks like a very straight line, but it didn't always feel like that when walking the path.
I don't think many careers feel like that, to be fair. I think, the concept of what we want to talk about today is one that not a lot of people do, kind of, I guess, vocalize, at least to other talent acquisition specialists. We always talk a lot about, sourcing methods, and we talk a lot about candidate experience, and this can somewhat embed itself into candidate experience, but also I think it's worth having its own topic. So I'm interested to understand a little bit more about, what we're going to go through, and it's around funnels. So can you explain to me, when I say funnels in recruitment, explain to me what that means, and then, we'll dive into kind of how you see things here.
Yeah, sure. Happy to. So as you just said, I think in the talent acquisition bubble, we discuss a lot about how can we get people, or even more people, better people, into the top of our funnel. Like, we're sourcing, we have dedicated employer branding campaigns, and we're spending, I don't know how many €1,000 on job posts on different pages, right? And as you mentioned, we also think about the candidates. How can we make sure that the people who come out of the funnel at the bottom actually accept our offer? We talk about candidate experience, compensation and benefits, all of these topics. And we mention the funnel a lot of times in these discussions, but we never really look at it closely. I mean, what is the funnel actually? The funnel is the different steps and methods that we take and that all the candidates go through that are the basis for our decision whether someone is qualified or not. So as much as it helps to put more people into the funnel to get, better candidates, better hires, more hires, maybe it's also worth to stop and think for a second, what are we actually doing in the funnel? Why are we doing it? And could we maybe improve the process that the candidates go through?
How do you think this approach then is kind of taking a step back? How do you think it's different from what other talent acquisition teams are typically doing?
I don't know if they are doing it or not. I don't want to claim that anyone is not doing it. But from what I've seen in the past, there are a couple of standard instruments. Let's say we use interviews. I think everyone uses interviews. Maybe we use a challenge or some kind of simulation, a design challenge, a coding challenge, and then we usually look at the candidate CV and maybe we make a referral call, right? That is like usually what, 85% of the recruitment processes look like out there, at least from my experience. And I'm just wondering, how did we get there? Did we make a conscious decision this is the method that I want to use for this and that reason? Or are we just doing it because, the company where we initially started out in the talent space, they did it like that. And then we learned, okay, that's the way you do it. And now we just, keep on doing it.
Yeah.
That's the question.
And why do you think it's important that we spend time looking at the funnel?
There is a lot of potential in the funnel. There's a lot of potential to improve the hiring decisions that we make. And I think we all know how painful and costly a hiring mistake is. And there's also a lot of potential for the candidate experience, because maybe we are putting candidates through steps that turn out to be unnecessary. So I think simply from an economic point of view, it would make a lot of sense to double check the process. But also from a moral point of view, I think we owe it to candidates, to only put them through steps that are actually necessary.
That sounds very obvious, by the way, when you're saying this.
Right?
But I would also be mindful of not harnessing everyone and saying everyone's not doing it. We hope people are. I imagine there's a lot of people listening who probably don't really understand the funnel too much for their own company and why they're doing it, as you say, or we're just doing it because we're doing it. Why do you think there could be a lack of focus around this topic?
I think it is not something that is simply common knowledge or highly discussed. I think the great thing about our talent acquisition bubble is that it's so diverse. You have people from so many different backgrounds, so many different experiences, which is awesome, which is great, because we all know about the benefits of having a diverse setup. But there is not this one training, what do you study to become a talent acquisition manager, to become a recruiter? What is the path to get there? And I think there is no straightforward path. So there is not this one set of common knowledge that everyone has. We are like a huge diagram and everyone has a bit of knowledge. And maybe there are some aspects that we can all agree on, but everybody has their own field of specialized knowledge, and formats like this one, like your podcast, are a great way of sharing this knowledge.
I didn't want to do the self-plug, but you've done it for me, so thank you for that. But I agree. I think when you look at other industries or other professions, and you mentioned software already, and you mentioned design, which is obviously where I know obviously your team hiring across other positions as well. But you're absolutely right. In software, you get specific methodologies to complete tasks. The process, you can go from one company to another company. Yes, it might be slightly different, but you're probably going to follow agile, or you're going to follow a similar kind of methodology. In recruitment, you're absolutely right. You get two companies that do the same thing, have wildly different processes when it comes to finding people, when it comes to, everything we've mentioned about the branding, all that side of things, which is quite crazy. But I also think it's because we're in an industry where we deal with people change their mind, and you have to be a little bit more fluid. You can't be as rigid as you can with lines of code, I guess.
Absolutely.
So with the funnel itself then, so how would you go about and actually start analyzing what your funnel looks like today?
I would start very simple with a pen and a piece of paper, or whatever your digital tool of choice is, and write down all the steps that the candidate goes through. So what kind of information do they have to put in our application mask online? What kind of documents are we asking for? What kind of interviews are they going through? Who's in there? What are we asking for? What are we trying to find out there? And then for each of these steps, I would ask myself, what are we actually trying to find out in this step? What is the requirement that we're trying to test for here? And the next question would be, is this really the best way to test for this? And then maybe even the next steps, if it is, yes, then could we maybe still improve it a bit further? You wanted to say something?
No.
I was just trying to come up with an example, right? We have this interview because we want to measure communication skills. And then we think, okay, is that the best way? Yes, I think an interview is a good way to measure communication skills. Then you could still go ahead and think, okay, but how can we make the most out of our interviews? How can we make sure that is this really the best possible interview we could conduct.
Would you suggest we do that for every single position that we have? You know, it doesn't matter if it's the first time you've been hiring for that role or the 10th time you've hired for that role. Would you still have a quick analysis to say, okay, where is the market today? Does this still need to happen in this way? Or would it be more of a, I don't know, quarterly review or a yearly review?
That's a bit of a difficult question, because I think the underlying basics, like, you know, psychometric quality criteria, they don't change a lot. So this you don't have to review for every role every month. But if you have different processes for different positions, it makes sense to look at each of these processes at least once. From my experience, companies have a set of standard steps that they take, and they adapt it a bit. You know, a junior takes a few interviews less, and a C-level takes a few interviews more. But from my experience, it's always based on one standard process. So maybe that's a good starting point, because I know the reality, let's be honest, nobody has time to dive so deeply into each and every one of their processes. But let's maybe start with one. Let's start with the stereotypical process that we use. And that's a good starting point. And I think that you can take a lot of learnings from doing this exercise once that you can then take on to other processes that you're having in your company.
Nice. And you mentioned psychometrics, which is relating more to obviously what the title of this is, which is the science of recruitment, right? So what do you mean by psychometrics, and then relating it specifically to the talent acquisition function?
Yeah. When I talk about psychometrics, I'm referring to quality criteria for our recruitment methods. I think we all, by instinct, look at certain criteria when we are selecting our recruitment methods. We are probably thinking, how much time does it take to, for example, conduct the interview? Or what does this test tool that I just bought cost? You know, there are certain criteria that we're definitely looking at, but what we're not looking at is probably the psychometric criteria. I don't know, we usually talk about objectivity, reliability, and validity as the most important ones, or the three big ones, I would say. And maybe some people have already thought about objectivity, especially in combination with discussions around unconscious bias. But maybe reliability and validity are not as often part of the conversation.
I'm going to play dumb here for a second. Let's just pretend like I don't know anything. So explain to me what you mean by objectivity first, and then again how that relates to what we're talking about.
Yeah. So objectivity is basically the independence of the result from the person who is administering the test. If we are talking about interviews, it would be the independence of the result of the interview from the person who's conducting the interview. Let's say we have a candidate. I don't know, his name's Jake, whatever. And Jake is either qualified or not qualified for the position that we're hiring for, right? And it shouldn't make a difference whether I conduct this interview or you conduct this interview, because that doesn't change anything about Jake's qualification for it. And that is basically objectivity.
So as a recruitment team, you feel objectivity is one that, recruitment team, talent acquisition function in general, do you feel that's an area that most people are quite comfortable with? They can get to kind of the answer around objectivity quite easily, or they're at least thinking about it?
That I would assume, yes. I never know for sure. I only have limited experience myself. But I think if we look at these three main criteria that I just mentioned, that is the most common one to be discussed also in the talent space.
So then the other two, let's spend time looking at those if they're not as common. So what do we mean by reliability?
Yeah, reliability basically means that I come to the same result over time. Let's say we have a candidate and we put them through a personality test. And let's say the candidate, her name's Carol, she's taking the test today and it comes to a certain result about her personality. If she were to take the test again in 2 weeks' time or 2 months' time or even 2 years' time, it should still come to the same result, because personality, for example, is quite a stable construct that doesn't change so much over time. So the tool should not come up, or the test should not come up with different results just because we're taking it at a different time.
And relate that to, I guess, the talent acquisition role. You obviously just use a personality example, so the Myers-Briggs, or if you choose to use something that's not that. What other kind of aspects of the other aspects of the funnel could reliability be tested against? Because I'm thinking, say Carol's obviously applied to the job, unsuccessful. How can we test the reliability of this funnel if she doesn't reapply?
I would look at reliability, especially when evaluating tests. In the talent acquisition space, I think everyone gets a lot of cold calls and emails about people who want to sell you some kind of assessment tool, some kind of test that will, magically make your hiring process faster, cheaper, better, easier, and everything. And I think it's especially important that when you evaluate these kinds of tests, that you ask, for example, for reliability, just asking some high-level questions. How has your test been constructed? Were there any industrial and organizational psychologists involved? How do you ensure the psychometric quality criteria of your test? I think just by asking these questions alone, you can probably weed out a lot of less serious sellers, because they won't have an answer to that. And of course,
it's about being a bit. Okay.
Yeah, sorry, I understand. Of course, not every one of us can be a psychologist or can have a lot of expertise in these areas. At some point, we always have to trust the information that people are giving us. But I think just by asking these basic questions and seeing how they react, it's already a big step forward.
Yeah, 100%. I don't think you need to be, as you say, a psychologist to ask the question around that, and then ultimately see how the other person responds. If it's something that they are comfortable with answering, the data, or the information is likely to be factual. If they are or take 2 weeks to get back to you, realistically, it's probably not something that they're used to getting answers. And as you say, that, so we're talking about reliability, not about the candidate in that particular process, but we're talking about adding tools into the funnel and being a bit more aware of what you're bringing into that funnel to see if it's the right thing or not. Is that right?
That was at least what I had in mind initially, but maybe your idea is also worth thinking about a little further. I just couldn't answer it on the spot right now.
No, that's fine. I mean, what I'm thinking is ultimately, once you have the tool, testing the reliability of that tool in the live process. But you're absolutely right. You can ask the question before you even get it, and look at the data from the company who's making the sale, anyways. And then the last point, obviously, is around validity. So, same question. What do we mean by validity?
Yeah, that is even harder to answer because there are actually different kind of validities. But I would like to focus on the most important one, and that is my tool, my test, my recruitment method, my interview, actually measuring what it is supposed to measure? And that is, for example, a very classical case is the interview. Let's say I am conducting an interview and I want to find out about some technical skill of the candidate. Am I really measuring the technical skill, or is a big part of the candidate's expression or of my impression of the candidate maybe how well they are able to articulate themselves, how self-conscious they seem or not, how well they can speak, how well they look, and other things like that also play into my evaluation of the candidate after this interview.
So that's we're looking at, is the test itself testing what we needed, or am I bringing in other elements and making a judgment across 5-6 different factors opposed to the one that test is meant to be actually analyzing?
Exactly. Another very classical example is also the intelligence test. There's a big danger that when you try to measure intelligence, you're actually measuring a person's ability to understand the questions, to memorize some things or other aspects. So it's, of course, already difficult. Is it really intelligence, or is maybe someone not a native speaker of my language, German, for example, in our case, and already has a disadvantage in answering this test? Am I still measuring intelligence, or am I measuring some degree of the German language? That is a very typical example that we usually use for this.
Yeah, this is definitely a different mindset to the talent acquisition kind of funnel. Something that I've actually not thought about before either. So it is a little bit difficult to get your head wrapped around. So do you have, I guess, an example of where specifically, I guess, with validity, where, maybe this had worked for you, or maybe where it hasn't worked and kind of how it got, whatever the outcome, how it got to the outcome?
So one example for lack of validity is, for example, if we start hiring without a proper requirement analysis. Because as I said before, it's not only am I measuring what I'm supposed to measure, but also is what I'm measuring actually relevant for the job. So if I kick off my recruitment process without a proper requirement analysis, then I am putting candidates through all kinds of steps, and I am making a decision based on a lot of information that was never relevant in the first place, because I simply started with the wrong requirements or a wrong assumption, actually, about the requirements that I have.
I guarantee 99% of people that listen to this have done that. Even if they don't want to admit it. I mean, I've definitely done it. I done it like 3 weeks ago, but the hiring manager wasn't aware of what he specifically wanted. I forgot the question. It happens even to more experienced people as well. So I think that's definitely a good example. So with this mindset, like I said, it's a complete different shift, I think, from what a lot of people maybe have. But ultimately, why do you think it's important to look at all three? These, validity, reliability, and objectivity within your funnel?
Yeah, I think they cover a wide range of topics that we should be looking out for. Speaking on a very high level, validity makes sure that we are looking for the right things, right? That we're looking for things that are relevant and that we're testing the things that we want to test. Objectivity makes sure that it doesn't matter which member of our recruitment team, for example, conducts the interview or conducts the test, we will still get to the same result. And reliability, maybe a bit more underlying, is one way to make sure that we are using proper tests and not any tests that are not worth their money, maybe, to put it that way. And it's never the expectation that we have a detailed analysis of all three of them for every single step of the way. I don't think that is 100% realistic in this high-paced environment that we're working in. I just think having these criteria in the back of your mind and having thought about them once and having critically challenged your own process once based on these questions can be a really helpful exercise. We don't have to over-engineer it. We're not all psychologists. That's not the idea right here. The idea is just to, at least, let's think about this once together and then challenge our process once and then move on from that and maybe improving a few things on the way.
I think it would definitely help maybe the relationship between talent acquisition and the market in some regard. So, for example, I do a lot of software, and the amount of times I'll see a post on LinkedIn or other social media platforms where it clearly states, I would never do a technical task, or, again, a technical task I've done and there's no response. And, I think having that, as you say, that review to at least determine, do we actually need this, or is there a better method that we can adopt as a team to get to the same outcome without having to implement so many steps in that process, instead of just defaulting, we do intro, tech task, review, final?
Yeah, I think it's always a trade-off. There's always a trade-off to using something or not. I don't know how many times I have discussed the question, should we send the coding challenge before the first interview or after? Our interest to invest interview time in candidates who have at least passed the coding challenge, but of course the candidates' interest to have a chance to get to know us, the company, and the position before we put them through the test. I think it's always a trade-off. There's no right or wrong, but if we have thought about why exactly we're doing it and why we think this is the right decision, then we are also able to explain to the candidate why we think that it's the right decision and why we have decided to do it this way. And I think this will never apply to all candidates, but I think someone who is generally interested in our company or our role would then be willing to take part in the process if we are able to properly understand where we're coming from and why we think this is the best way to handle it.
I love that. That's a really open, honest way to start the relationship with candidates, to say, look, we understand that not everyone does it the same way. This is why we do it. It also kind of gives you a segue into what the company is like, as from more of a cultural side of things, without reeling off values and stuff that you can just find online. It's giving them a window into, this is actually who we are, and this is how we're creating processes and how we're making decisions. This is what we're doing. And then a candidate can then, say, sit there back and say, okay, it's for me or it's not for me.
Yeah. And it also shows that this is never a standalone process, right? We are always embedded into the overall communication process, for example, of the company. I can have the best, most valid, most objective, most reliable process in the world. If it turns out not to be candidate friendly, and I do not have the culture of communicating why I'm doing it, or I'm not able to communicate properly to the candidates, it's not going to help me at all.
Yeah.
So there's always a trade-off.
What do you think? I mean, I know you've already explained a little bit more about the three elements and the couple of questions you can do to start thinking about it. But let's say, for example, I'm in an IC position within a talent acquisition function. I'm not leading teams. I'm not the person making the final decision on how to create that process. What could I do if, I want to start this journey of kind of changing the team's mindset or changing how we're doing things a little bit around kind of these three elements?
I think everyone can start. I don't think you have to be in a leadership role to start the discussion, because it really starts with asking questions. You could, if you have a certain set of roles that you're responsible for, you could start to analyze or start to look at your own roles the way that we described in the very beginning, writing it down, asking yourself, why are we doing this? Is this the best way to do it? And then I hope that most of us work in a culture where they would be able to bring this up, maybe in a team meeting, in a jour fix, in a stand-up, I don't know, to spark a bit of a bigger discussion about it and to put it on the agenda for the overall team. I know that doesn't apply to everyone, but it's worth a shot, in my opinion.
So you'd say just jump in, analyze yourself, get stuck in, and then bring it up to the wider team to see if it's something that we can all communicate.
Yeah, and then maybe you will run into questions and you will be like, this Clara lady didn't explain that in the podcast that I just listened to. Then you will Google some things, and if it's something that you're generally interested in, you will find your way. I'm pretty sure it's not rocket science.
Yeah, I think that a lot of this is about just taking a step back. I think a lot of times in talent acquisition and recruitment, you get the requirement, you just dive headfirst in. You don't question, you're going to question the role, as you say, find out what you actually need to search for. But you just trust the process is in place because it's always worked that way. And then you just find and fill the top of the funnel. And hopefully by the end of it, the bottom of the funnel works. But it's just taking that step back and realizing.
Exactly. And I mean, it's understandable. I look at the volume of positions that some people have to fill. Look at the pressure that is apparent in some areas, in some teams. So to have the luxury and the time to actually step back, take the step back, sit down, analyze your processes, that is not something everybody has. But maybe it's worth to make a business case out of it, because there are benefits that can be reaped from doing things properly. And if we maybe look at it from that side, or argue with our manager or whoever is responsible to make this decision, if we argue based on that, maybe it's worth a shot and they will listen to us.
I mean, I'm going to put my recruiter hat on for a second, because I always talk about people to trying to, like, when you're writing CVs or you're trying to interview, I always talk about value add. Don't regurgitate the spec. What's the value add? This is one of those prime examples where you can truly bring value to a team that is going to look fantastic on your own resume and your own interview processes in the future by saying, this is how we adjusted the process, or this is how we at least reviewed it to determine, was our process valid? Was it reliable? And was we kind of making decisions objectively? Which is something I guarantee a lot of people probably aren't going to be doing. At least hopefully, before this podcast. You never know, we might have started something, or you've started something. But I think it's also, you say, it's a great opportunity for you to learn, great opportunity for you to lead projects, maybe if you've never done something like that before, whilst kind of building that awareness. So, yeah.
Yeah, maybe the idea of value add that you just mentioned, let's put some numbers to it, right?
Yeah.
So imagine you're hiring for a role. It doesn't matter what role it is, and you have 100 candidates that applied for it. 50 of them are qualified. I know it's a dream scenario. That's usually not the case at the moment, but that would be the base rate in our application pool, right? And if you have a recruitment process or method or tool that is not valid, you might as well flip a coin. And let's imagine you go through this fictional room of your 100 candidates, of which 50 are qualified, and you're flipping a coin to make a decision whom to hire or whom not to hire. I think it's pretty clear that when you hire, 30 people, only 15 of them will be qualified, because you had no way, no tool to identify those who are qualified and those who are not. And if we imagine the same candidate pool, the same 100 people of whom 50 are qualified, and we had for some reason a perfect magical assessment tool with 100% validity, which is also not realistic, I know, then I would 100% be able to identify the qualified candidates. And out of the 30 people I hire, 30 would be qualified hires. So I think we all have the numbers in the back of our minds. How much does it cost to make a wrong hire? How much does it cost to replace someone, etc. pp. So there actually is a real value add. There is a real business case for looking at these things.
Yeah, actually, I was literally writing a post today about the cost of making a hire, not just losing the hire, but the actual end-to-end process of all the tools you're paying for, the time you're investing, which is actually I was writing just before we jumped onto this. So absolutely. And it gives you that chance to actually review your tools and not just sign up for another year because, we need to spend the budget or, whatever. If we don't spend, we're going to lose it next year. I know maybe not at this moment in time, teams aren't thinking that way, but I definitely know teams that thought that way. So it's just making sure everything that we're investing in, is it bringing value to us as a business and to the candidate's process? We need it. So are we using it correctly, and kind of going back through that?
Yeah, definitely. And I think I mentioned before, it's not just psychometric criteria, it's other criteria as well, right? How economic is it to use something? How useful is this test actually? How legitimate is it from a legal maybe or an ethical point of view? I think many countries have strict equal treatment acts in place. For example, you cannot just do anything you want nowadays. So there's actually an even wider range of criteria than just the psychometric ones that we discussed that we could be looking at once we're at it anyway.
Yeah, conversation for a different day. Those otherwise we'll open up a can of worms. And yeah, but no, Clara, I really appreciate you spending the time and running through this. Like I said, it's a completely different approach, but also similar in some regards. But it will take, I think, somebody some time to kind of really understand it. It definitely takes me time to understand it. So hopefully, obviously, there's some good takeaways from this, and you can start our journeys to understand how we can improve the funnel specifically. I really appreciate you taking the time and for sharing your knowledge with us today.
Thanks for having me again. It was great fun.